I'm going to be reading Book 1, Chapter 1 of my favorite book, Serafina and the Black Cloak. We're going to read a chapter every day, so let's get started. Serafina and the Black Cloak by Robert Beatty. Biltmore Estate, Asheville, North Carolina, 1899. Chapter 1. Serafina opened her eyes and scanned the darkened workshop, looking for any rats stupid enough to come into her territory while she slept. She knew they were out there, just beyond her nightly range, crawling in the cracks and shadows of the great house's sprawling basement, keen to steal whatever they could from the kitchens and storage rooms. She had spent most of the day napping in her favorite out-of-the-way places. But it was here, curled up on the old mattress behind the rusty boiler in the protection of the workshop, that she felt most at home. Hammers, benches, and gears hung down from the rough hewn beams, and the familiar smell of machinery oil filled the air. Her first thought as she looked around her and listened out into the reaching darkness was that if she felt it was a good night for hunting. Her pa, who had worked on the construction of Biltmore Estate years before, had lived in the basement without permission ever since, lay sleeping on the cot he'd secretly built behind the supply racks. Embers glowed in the old metal barrel over which he had cooked their dinner of chicken and grits a few hours before. They had huddled before the cook fire for warmth as they ate. As usual, she had eaten the chicken but left the grits. Eat your supper, her pa grumbled. Did she had answered, setting down her half-empty tin plate. Your whole supper, he said, pushing the plate toward her. Or you're never going to get bigger than a little shoat. Her pa likened her to a skinny baby pig when he wanted to get a rise out of her, figuring she'd get so furious with him that she'd wolf down those nasty grits down her throat to spite herself. I'm not going to eat the grits, Pa, she said, smiling a little, no matter how many times you put 'em in front of me. They ain't nothing but ground-up corn, girl, he said, poking at the fire with a stick to arrange the other sticks the way he wanted 'em. Everybody and his uncles like corn except you. You know I can't stomach anything green or yellow or disgusting like that, Pa, so quit hollering at me. If I was hollering, you'd know it, he said, shoving his poker stick into the fire. By and by, they soon forgot about the grits and went on to talk about something else. It made Serafina smile to think about her dinner with her father. She couldn't imagine much else in the world except maybe sleeping in the warmth of one of the basement's small sunlit windows. That was finer than a bit of banter with her pa. Careful to not wake him, she slinked off the mattress, padded down the workshop's gritty stone floor, and snuck out into the winding passageway. Well, still rubbing the sleep out of her eyes and stretching out her arms and legs, she couldn't help feel but a trace of excitement. The tantalizing sensation of starting a brand new night tingled through her body. She felt her muscles and senses coming alive, as if she were an owl stirring its wings and flexing its talons before it flies off for a ghostly hunt. She moved quietly through the darkness, past the laundry rooms, pantries, and kitchens. The basement had been bustling with servants all day, but the rooms were empty now, and dark, just the way she liked them. She knew that the Vanderbilts and their many guests were sleeping on the second and third floors above her, but here it was quiet. She loved to prowl through the endless corridors and shadowed storage rooms. She knew the touch and feel, the glint and gloom, of every nook and cranny. This was her domain at night, and hers alone. She heard a faint slithering just ahead. The night was beginning quickly. She stopped. She listened. 2 doors down, the scrambling of tiny feet on bare floor. She crept forward along the wall. When the sound stopped, she stopped as well. When the sound resumed, she crept forward once more. It was a technique she taught herself at the age of 7. Move when they're moving, stay still when they're still. Now she could hear the creatures breathing, the scratching of their toenails on the stone, and the dragging of their tails. She felt the familiar trembling in her fingers and the tightness in her legs. She slipped through the half-open door into the storeroom and saw them in the darkness. 2 huge rats, covered in greasy brown fur, had slithered one by one through the drain pipe in the floor. The intruders were obviously newcomers, foolishly scurrying around for cockroaches, when they could have been slurping custard off the fresh-baked pastries just down the hall. Dumb rats, she thought. Without making a sound or even disturbing the air, she stalked slowly toward the rats. Her eyes focused on them. Her ears picked up every sound they made. She could even smell their foul sewer stench. All the while they went about their ratty business and had no idea she was there. She stopped just a few feet behind them, hidden in the blackness of a shadow, poised for the leap. This was the moment she loved. The moment just before she lunged. Her body swayed slightly back and forth, tuning her angle of attack. Then she pounced. In one quick, explosive moment, she grabbed the squealing, writhing rats in her bare hands. "Gotcha, you nasty vermin," she hissed. The smaller rat squirmed in terror, desperate to get away. But the larger one twisted around and bit her hand. "There'll be none of that," she snarled, cramping the rat's neck between her finger and thumb. The rats wriggled wildly, but she kept a good hard hold on them and wouldn't let go. It had taken her a while to learn that lesson when she was younger, that once you had them, you had to squeeze hard and hold on, no matter, even if their little claws scratched you and their scaly tails curled around your hand like some sort of nasty gray snake. Finally, after several seconds of vicious struggling, the exhausted rats realized they couldn't escape her. They went still and stared suspiciously at her with beady black eyes. Their sniveling little noses and wickedly long whiskers vibrated with fear. The rat who'd bit her, slowly slithered his long, scaly tail around her wrist, wrapping it 2 times, searching for a new advantage to pry himself free. "Don't even try it," she warned him, still breathing from his bite. She was in no mood for ratty schemes. She'd been bitten before, but she never did like it much. Carrying the grisly bits in her clenched fists, she took them down the passageway. It felt good to get 2 rats before midnight, and they were particularly ugly characters, the kind that would chew straight through a burlap sack due to the grain inside, or knock eggs off the shelves so they could lick the mess from the floor. She climbed the old stone stairs that led outside, then walked across the moonlit grounds of the estate all the way back to the edge of the forest. Then she hurled the rats into the leaves. "Now get out of here and don't come back," she shouted at them. "I won't be so nice next time." The rats tumbled across the forest floor with the force of her fierce throw, then came to a trembling stop, expecting a killing blow. When it didn't come, they turned up and looked at her in astonishment. "Get going before I change my mind," she said. Hesitating no longer, the rats scurried into the underbrush. There had been a time where the rats she caught weren't so lucky, when she'd leave their dead bodies next to her pa's bed to show her night's work. But she hadn't done that in a coon's age. Ever since she was a young'un, she studied the men and women who worked in the basement, so she knew that each one had a particular job. It was her father's responsibility to fix the elevators, dumb waiters, window gears, steam heating systems, and all the other mechanical contractions on which the 250-room mansion depended on. He even made sure the pipe organ in the grand banquet hall worked properly for all Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt's fancy balls. Beside her pa, there were cooks, kitchen maids, coal shovelers, chimney sweepers, laundrywomen, pastry makers, housemaids, footmen, and countless others. When she was 10 years old, she had asked, "Do I have a job like everyone else, Pa?" "Of course you do," he said, but she suspected that it wasn't true. He just didn't want to hurt her feelings. "It's actually an extremely important position around here, and there ain't no one who does it better than you, Sarah." "Tell me, Pa, what is it?" "I reckon you're Biltmore CRC. What's that mean?" she asked in excitement. "You're the chief rat catcher," he said. However the words were intended, they embolized themselves in her mind. She remembered even now, 2 years later, how her little chest had swelled and she had smiled with pride when he said those words. Chief rat catcher. She'd liked the sound of that. Everyone knew that rodents were a big problem in a place like Biltmore, with all its sheds and shelves and barns and whatnot. And it was true that she had shown a natural-born talent for catching for snatching the cunning, food-stealing, dropping, leaving disease-infected, four-legged vermin that so elude the adult folk with their crude traps and poisons. Mice, which were so timid and prone to panic, induced mistakes at key moments. There were no trouble for her to catch. It was the rats that gave her the scamper each night, and it was on the rats that she had honed her skills. She was 12 years old now, and that was who she was, Serafina, CRC. But as she watched the two rats run in the forest, a strange and powerful feeling took hold of her. She wanted to follow them. She wanted to see what they saw beneath leaf and twig, to explore the rocks and dells, the streams and wonders. But her pa had forbidden it. Never go into the forest, he had told her many times. There are dark forces there that no one understands, things that aren't natural and can do you wicked harm. She stood at the edge of the forest and looked up as far as she could into the trees. For years she had heard of stories who got lost in the forest and never returned. She wondered what dangers lurked in there. Was it black magic, demons, or some sort of hideous beasts? What was her pa so afraid of? That she might bandy back and forth with her pa about all sorts of things, just for the jump of it, like refusing her grits, sleeping all day and hunting all night, spying on the Vanderbilts and their guests. But she never argued about this. She knew that when he said these words, he was serious as her dead mama. For all the spanking, telling all the sneak about, sometimes you just stayed quiet and did what you were told because you sensed it was a good way to keep breathing. Feeling strangely lonesome, she turned away from the forest and gazed at the estate. The moon rose above the steeply pitched slate roofs of the house and reflected in the panes of the glass that domed the winter garden. The stars sparkled above the mountains. The grass and trees and flowers of the beautiful manicured grounds glowed in the midnight light. She could see every detail, every toad and snail, all the other creatures of the night. A lone mockingbird sang its evening song from a magnolia tree, and the baby hummingbirds tucked into their tiny nests among the climbing wisteria rustled in their sleep. It lifted her chin a bit to think that her pa had helped build all this. He had been one of the hundreds of stonemasons, wood carvers, and other craftsmen who had come to Asheville from the surrounding mountains to construct Biltmore Estate years before. He had stayed on to maintain the machinery, but when all the other basement workers went home to their families each night, he and Serafina hid among the steaming pipes and metal tools in the workshop like stowaways in the engine room of a great ship. The truth was they had no other place to go, no kin to go home to. Whenever she asked about her mama, her father refused to talk about him. So there wasn't anyone else beside her and her pa. They had made the basement their home for as long as she could remember. How come we don't live in the servants' quarters or in town like the other workers, Pa? She had asked many times. Never you mind about that, he would grumble in reply. Over the years, her pa had taught her how to read and write pretty well, and told her plenty of stories of the world, but he was never too keen on talking about what she wanted to talk about. Which was going on in his head, in his heart, and what happened to her mama, and why she didn't have any brothers or sisters, and why her pa didn't have any friends who came round to call. Sometimes she wanted to reach down inside of him and shake him to see what would happen, but most of the time her pa just slept all night and worked all day, and cooked their dinners in the evening and told her stories, and they had a pretty good life, the two of them. And she didn't shake him because she knew he didn't want to be shook, so she just let him be. Okay. At night, when everyone else in the house went to sleep, she crept upstairs and snatched books to read in the moonlight. She overheard the butler boast to a visiting writer that Mr. Vanderbilt had collected 20,000 books, only half of which fit in the library room. The others were stored on tables and shelves throughout the house, and to Serafina these were like June berries ripe for picking, too tempting to resist. No one seemed to notice when a book was missing and put back in its place a few days later. She had read about the great battles between the states with tattered flags flying. She had read of steaming iron beast that hurtled people hither and yon. She wanted to sneak into the graveyard at night with Tom and Huck and be shipwrecked with the Swiss Family Robinson. Some nights she longed to be one of the four sisters with their loving mother and little woman. Other nights she imagined meeting the ghost of Sleepy Hollow or tapping with Poe's Black Raven. She liked to tell it about the books she read, and she often made stories of her own, filled with imaginary friends, strange families, and ghosts in the night. But he was never interested in her tales of fancy and fright. He was far too sensible a man for all that he didn't like to believe in anything but bricks, bolts, and solid things. More and more she wondered what it would be like to have some sort of secret friend her pa didn't know about. Sorry, I'm back up. More and more someone she could talk to about things, but she didn't tend to meet too many children her age skulking through the basement in the dead of night. A few of the low-level kitchen skulkins and boilers attendant who worked in the basement went home each night and seen her darting here or there, and knew vaguely who she was, but the maids and manservants who worked on the main floors did not, and certainly not the master and mistress of the house. The Vanderbilts are a good kind of folk, Sarah, her pa told her, but they aren't our kind of folk. You keep yourself scarce when they come about. Don't let anyone get a good look at you. And whatever you do, don't tell anyone your name or who you are. You're here? Serafina did hear. She heard very well. She could hear a mouse change its mind. Yet she didn't know exactly why her pa lived the way they did. She didn't know why her father hid her away from the world, why he was ashamed of her, but she knew for one thing that she loved him with all her heart, and the last thing she ever wanted to do was cause him trouble. So she had become an expert at moving undetected, not just to catch the rats, but to avoid the people too. When she was feeling particularly brave or lonely, she darted upstairs into the comings and goings of the sparkling folk. She snuck in, crept, and hid. She was small for her age and light of foot. The shadows were her friends. She spied on the fancy-dressed guests as they arrived in their splendid horse-drawn carriages. No one upstairs ever saw her hiding beneath the bed or behind the door, or no one ever noticed her in the closet when they put their coats inside. When the ladies and gentlemen went on their walks around the grounds, they slinked up right next to them without them knowing it and listened to everything they were saying. She loved seeing the young girls in their blue and yellow dresses with ribbons fluttering in their hair, and she ran along with them when they frolicked along the ground. And when the children played hide and seek, they never realized there was another player. Sometimes she'd even see Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt walking arm in arm, or she'd see their 12-year-old nephew riding his horse across the grounds with his sleek black dog running alongside. She had watched them all, but none of them ever saw her, not even the dog. Lately she'd been wondering what would happen if they did. What if the boy glimpsed her? What would she do if his dog chased her? Could she get up a tree in time? Sometimes she would like to imagine what she would say if she met Mrs. Vanderbilt face to face. "Hello, Miss V. I catch your rats for you. Would you like them killed or just chucked out? I can do either." Sometimes she dreamed of wearing fancy dresses and ribbons in her hair and shiny shoes on her feet, and sometimes, just sometimes, she longed not just to listen secretly to the people around her, but talk to them. Not just to see them, but to be seen. As she walked through the moonlight across the open grass, and back to the main house, she wondered what would happen if one of the guests, or perhaps the young master in his bedroom on the second floor, happened to wake up and look out the window and see a mysterious girl walking alone in the night. Her pa never spoke of it, but she knew she wasn't exactly normal looking. She had a skinny little body, nothing but muscle, bone, and sinew. She didn't own a dress, so she wore one of her pa's old work shirts, which she cinched around her narrow waist and length of fibrous twine she scavenged from the workshop. She didn't buy any clothes because she didn't want people in town asking questions and start meddling. Meddling was something he could never brook. Her long hair wasn't a single color like normal people had, but varying shades of gold and light brown. Her face had a peculiar angularity in the cheeks, and she had long, steady amber eyes. She could see at night as well as she could see during the day. Even her soundless hunting skills weren't exactly normal. Every person she'd encountered, especially her pa, made so much noise when they walked. It was like they were one of the big, belligerent draft horses that pulled the farm equipment in Mr. Vanderbilt's fields. And it all made her wonder, looking up at the windows of the great house, what did the people sleeping in those rooms dream of? Their one-colored hair and their long, pointy noses and their big bodies lying in their soft beds all through the glorious darkness of the night. What did they long for? What made them laugh, or what made them jump? What did they feel inside? When did they have dinner at night? Did the children eat the grits, or just the chicken? Or both? As she glided down the stairs and back into the basement, she heard something in a distant corridor. She stopped and listened, but she couldn't quite make it out. It wasn't a rat, that much was certain. Something much larger. But what was it? Curious, she moved toward the sound. She went past her pa's workshop, the kitchens, and the other rooms she knew well, and into the deeper areas where she hunted less often. She heard doors closing, then the fall of footsteps and muffled voices. Her heart began to thump lightly in her chest. Someone was walking through the corridors of her basement at night. Her basement. She moved closer. It wasn't the servant who collected garbage each night, or one of the footmen fetching a late-night snack for a guest. She knew the sound of their footsteps well. Sometimes Butler's assistant, who was 11, would stop in the corner and gobble down a few of the cookies from the silver tray that the butler had sent him to retrieve. She'd just stand around the corridor from the darkness and pretend that they were friends, just talking and enjoying each other's company for a while. Then the boy would wipe the powdered sugar off his lips and off he'd go, hurrying the stairs to catch up on the time he lost. But this wasn't him. Whoever it was, he wore what sounded like a hard-soled shoes, expensive shoes, very expensive. But a gentleman proper had no business coming down into this area of the house. Why was he just wandering through the dark passages in the middle of the night? Increasingly curious, she followed the stranger, careful to avoid being seen. Whenever she stuck up close enough to almost see him, she could make up the shadow of a tall black shape, carrying a dimly lit lantern. There was another shadow there too, someone or something with him, but she didn't dare creep close enough to see who or what it was. It was a vast basement, with many different rooms, corridors, and levels, which had been built into the slope of the earth beneath the house. Some areas, like the kitchens and laundry, had smooth plaster walls and windows. The rooms there were plainly finished, but clean and dry and well suited to the daily work of the servants. The most distant reaches of the understructure delved deep into the damp and earthen burrows of the family's massive foundation. Here the dark hardened mortar oozed out from behind the roughly hewn stone blocks that formed the wall and ceiling, and she seldom went there because it was cold, dirty, and dank. Suddenly the footsteps changed direction. They came toward her. 5 screeching rats came running down the corridor ahead of the footfalls, more terrified than any rodent she'd ever seen. Spiders crawled out of their cracks in the walls. Cockroaches and centipedes erupted from the earthen floor. Astounded why was she? She caught her breath and pressed herself to the wall, frozen in fear like a little rabbit kit, trembling beneath the shadow of a passing hawk. As the man walked toward her, she heard another sound. It was a shuffling agitation like a small person's slippered feet, perhaps a child, but there was something wrong. The children's feet were scraping on the stone, sometimes sliding. The child was crippled. No, the child was being dragged. "No, sir, please, no," the girl whimpered, her voice trembling with despair. "We're not supposed to be down here." The girl spoke like someone who had been raised in a well-heeled family and attended a fancy school. "Don't worry, we're going right in here," the man said, stopping at the door just before the corner from Serafina. Now she could hear his breathing, the movement of his hands, and the rustle of his clothing. Flashes of heat scorched through her. She wanted to run. She wanted to flee, but she couldn't get her legs to move. "There's nothing to be frightened of, child," he said to the girl. "I'm not going to hurt you." The way he said these words caused the hairs on the back of Serafina's neck to rise. "Don't go with..." "I'm sorry, I'm terribly tired. I did not get much sleep last night." "Don't go with him," she thought. "Don't go." The girl sounded like she was a little younger than her, and Serafina wanted to help her, but she couldn't find the courage. She pressed herself against the wall, certain that she would be heard or seen. Her legs trembled, feeling as if they would crumble beneath her. She couldn't see what happened next, but the girl suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. The piercing sound caused Serafina to jump, and she had to stifle her own scream. Then she made a struggle, and the girl tore away from the men and fled down the corridor. "Run, girl, run," Serafina thought. The man's steps faded in the distance as he went far after her. Serafina could tell he wasn't running full out, but moving steadily, relentlessly, like he knew the girl couldn't escape him. Serafina's pa had told him that was how red wolves would chase down their prey and kill deer in the mountains, with dogged stamina rather than bursts of speed. Serafina didn't know what to do. Should she hide in the dark corner and hope he didn't find her, or should she flee with the terror-stricken rats and spiders while she had the chance? She wanted to run back to her father, but what about the child? The girl was helpless, so slow and weak and frightened, and more than anything she needed a friend to help her fight. Serafina wanted to be that friend. She wanted to help, but she couldn't bring herself to move in that direction. Then she heard the girl scream again. That dirty, rotten rat's going to kill her, Serafina thought. He's going to kill her. With a burst of anger and courage, she raced toward the sound. Her legs felt like explosions of speed. Her mind blazed with fear and exhilaration. She turned corner after corner. But when she came into the mossy stone stairway that led down into the deepest bowels of the sub-basement, she stopped, gasping for breath, and shook her head. It was a cold, wet, slimy, horrible place that she had always done her best to avoid, especially in the winter. She told stories that they heard dead bodies in the sub-basement in the winter, when the ground was too frozen to dig a grave. Why in the world had the girl run down there? It was a dead end. Serafina made her way, halting down the wet, sticky stairs, lifting and shaking off each foot after each slimy step she took. Slanting corridor. She followed a long slanting corridor where the ceiling dripped with brown sludge. The whole dank, disgusting place gave her the jitters, something fierce, but she kept going. "You've got to help her," she told herself again. "You can't turn back." She wound it's going too much like you. Then she heard the sound of fighting and shouting just around the corner ahead of her. She was very close. She hesitated, frightened, but her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst. Her body shook all over. She didn't want to go another step, but friends had to help friends. She didn't know much about life, but she did knew that was for sure. She wasn't going to run away like a scared out of her wits squirrel when somebody needed her most. Trembling all over, she steadied herself the best she could. Sucked in a deep breath and pushed herself around the corner. A broken lantern lay tipped on the stone floor, its glass shattered, but with the flames still burning. In the hollow of the faltering light, a girl in a yellow dress struggled for her life. A tall man in a black cloak and hood, his hands stained with blood, grabbed the girl by the wrist. The girl tried to pull away. "No, let me go!" she screamed. "Quiet down," the man told her, his voice seething in a dark, unworldly tone. "I'm not going to hurt you, child," he said for the second time. The girl had curly blonde hair and pale white skin. She fought to escape, but the man in the black cloak pulled her toward him. She He tangled her in his arms. She fell and struck him in the face with her tiny fists. "Just stay still and this will be over," he said, pulling her toward him. Serafina realized that she'd made a dreadful mistake. This was far more than she could handle. She knew that she should help the girl, but she was so scared her feet stuck to the floor she couldn't even breathe, let alone fight. "Help her!" Serafina's mind screamed at her. "Help her! Attack the rat! Attack the rat!" She finally plucked up her courage and charged forward, but at the moment the man's black satin cloak floated upward as if possessed by a smoky spirit. The girl screamed. The folds of the cloak slithered around her like the tentacles of a hungry serpent. The cloak seemed to move of its own accord, wrapping and twisting, accompanied by a disturbed rattling sound, like the hissing threads of 100 rattlesnakes. Serafina saw the girl's horrified face looking at her from which the folds of the black enveloping cloak. The girl's pleading blue eyes with fear. "Help me, help me." Then the folds closed over her. The scream went silent and the girl disappeared, leaving nothing but the blackness of the cloak. Serafina gasped in shock. One moment the girl was struggling to get free. The next, she vanished into thin air. The cloak had consumed her, overwhelmed with confusion and grief and fear. Serafina stood there, stunned in bewilderment. For several seconds the man seemed to vibrate violently, and a ghoulish aurora glowed around him in a dark shimmering haze. A horribly foul smell of rotting guts invaded Serafina's nostrils, forcing her head to jerk back. She wrinkled her nose and squinched her mouth and tried not to breathe in. She must have made some sort of involuntary gagging noise, for the man in the black cloak suddenly turned and looked at her, seeing her for the first time. It felt like a giant claw gripped around her chest. The fold of the man's hood shrouded his face, but she could see that his eyes blazed with an unnatural light. She stood frozen, utterly terrified. The man whispered in a raspy voice, "I'm not gonna hurt you, child." Okay, guys, so that's it for today. Check out tomorrow's video to read chapter 2. Oh, I forgot to show. So they do these things for the chapter every day, and I did it to show. It also has a picture of a tree. The other books are Serafina and the Twisted Staff, Serafina and the Splintered Heart, Serafina and the Seven Stars, and Willa of the Wood. Bye!